Welcome to a RahatCodes tutorial series. So this is going to be a series on tutorials on creating a full stack application with React, Node, Express, MongoDB, and GraphQL. So I'm going to be sharing small tutorials that you can use to help you build a full stack application with this stack, and they're all going to be sent out in small bite-sized pieces. So if you find this, or if you found this tutorial on Dev.to, you know that there's a blog post that accompanies it. So you can either follow along the blog post, or you can watch the video, or you can do both. So today, on this part 1 of the series, we're going to be setting up a small GraphQL server using Express and Apollo server. Cool. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a folder for the application. So we're going to call it student_GradeBook. Go ahead and go into that. All right, so we're going to be splitting this up into 2 pieces. I'm going to first make a folder for the back end. Later on in the series, we're going to make a different folder for the front end. I'm going to deploy these to 2 different repos. The reason being, I'm going to deploy the back end onto a service called Heroku. The front end is going to be deployed to Netlify. And I'll explain more about that when we get to the deployment part of our series. But for today, let's just create the backend. We're going to cd into the backend, and I'm going to say npm init-y, and this will create a package-lock.json for us. I'm going to go ahead and open that in code. Now you can use any code editor you like. I like using VS Code, so that's what I'm going to be using for this series. Okay. So I said the wrong thing before. It's not package-lock.json, it's package.json. You'll get a package lock later when we start installing some npm packages, which we're actually going to start doing now. So a couple things we're going to need to get started. We're going to need Express. So npm Express. And we're also going to get Apollo server. Let me go ahead and copy that over from my cheat sheet. Okay. So while those are installing, we can go ahead and get started on coding out our app. That's all we should need for now. See, as you can see, now we got the package.json. Cool. So let's make a new folder in our directory. We're going to call it source, or src. Now within source, we're just going to make a new file, and we'll name it index.js. All right. So we can go ahead and require the 2 packages that I have just installed. So the first thing we're going to do is grab Express. Const express equals require Express. This lets us use the Express package. And we're going to also get Apollo server and something called GQL, which will let us actually use GraphQL. And that's going to come from Apollo server Express. So, all right. Now that we've come here and realized we do need to install one more thing. We're going to be using GraphQL, so let's install that. Right. Wonderful. Now let's go ahead and start up a sort of small, somewhat simple GraphQL server. So first thing we want to do, we want to actually use Express, so we'll say const app equals Express. And we're going to go ahead and also create our server, so const server equals new Apollo server. And a lot of this is lifted off directly from the documentation. So you can go through the Apollo GraphQL documentation and take a look at that stuff too if you want to build your own from there. Now, the server is going to take a couple of things. We're going to need some type defs. We're going to need some resolvers. And that's actually it for our purposes. And we haven't actually defined what these two things are just yet. We will in just a second. And we're going to do server.apply middleware app. So this is basically applying our Apollo server to our Express app. Okay, great. So now another part here, we want to make sure our app is listening for when it gets turned on. So app.listen, we'll say, we'll just use port 4000. And we'll get like a little console log that'll show up in the terminal so we know our app is running. Console.log, I'll just say, and a rocket in there. The server is blasting off to 4000. Great. Now, we're not completely done just yet. We still have to define what these type defs and these resolvers are. So in GraphQL, these are kind of the building blocks for building your schema or the way you're going to be executing your GraphQL API. So type defs is your actual schema. It's everything that your GraphQL API is able to do. And resolvers are basically making sure that the GraphQL API knows how to execute all of the things that are in your type defs. So let's take a look at what that means. So the first thing that I'm going to do is define a very simple type def. Const type defs equals GQL. So the reason I brought this GQL thing in here, what we can do is actually pass in a string that converts the string itself into GraphQL AST. So that gets passed to Apollo server. Apollo server can actually read that as a GraphQL query. So Apollo server is actually taking care of a lot of things for us that we don't have to. So I'm going to define a type called query. In that query, I'm going to have a hello query. And whenever I run hello, I want to get back a string. And that's required. That exclamation mark means required, meaning every time I run this hello query, I want to get a string back. So I've defined my first query. Now I need to resolve it. So const resolvers is going to be an object. And then there's going to be some other objects. So the first object we want to define is query. So notice I have this type query in my type defs and this query in my resolvers. Anything I put in my type defs, there has to be a matching corresponding thing in my resolvers. So I know in my query I have this hello query. So what do I want this hello query to actually do? So hello is simply going to return me a string. And it's going to say hello world. And that's it. So let's go over that again real quick. I have my type defs. In my type defs, I have a query. In here, I'm saying that there's a query named hello. And anytime I run hello, I want a string back. So my resolvers is now going to say, okay, so you've got a query. I've got this query object in here. I've got this corresponding key in my object called hello, which is the same thing as here. So you need to get back a string. Sure, I'm going to give you back a string called hello world. And we're just passing those two things into our Apollo server so we have access to it. So we can go ahead and save this, head back to our terminal, and we're just going to run this with node. So node source index.js. Okay. Looks like I have something else running on 4000. That's fine. Let me go ahead and kill that. Or actually, for now, I'm going to go ahead and use a different port. So rather than 4000, we're going to use 4001. Okay, so great. It says the server is blasting off to 4001. So now if we head over to our browser and go to localhost 4001/GraphQL, we should get the GraphQL playground. Now, if you've ever used Postman, this is pretty similar to that. What this is going to do is help us test our GraphQL API. Not only that, if you click on this Docs tab over here, you'll see that the hello query that we defined exists in here. And basically everything that we're allowed to do exists in this docs and schema. So let's go ahead and run our first query. The cool thing about this playground, if you press Control space, you can get everything that you're allowed to run. So we're just going to run hello. Hit this little play button, and great. We get back some data, hello and hello world. And we've just run our very first GraphQL query. Awesome. So now we know that our API works. We're going to do a little bit of refactoring. We're going to be adding a lot of things into typedefs and to resolvers. So let's put them in their own little files. So we're going to have one file called resolvers.js and another file called typedefs.js. Great. Let's go ahead and move these. Copy this, send that over here. Now, we put this over here, but we need to make sure that it's usable. Quick way to do this, say exports.resolvers, and go ahead and write the rest of our resolvers. This will allow the remainder of our application to actually access the resolvers. And we're going to do something similar in here. So let's take this typedefs, paste it in here. Now remember, we use GraphQL to actually execute that. So we need to take this import and put it over there as well. So put that up top over here. Or, yeah, I can just edit this out. Great. So now, remember we exported out our resolvers, so we need to do the same type of thing here. So we can just do exports.typedefs equals GQL, and the rest of our typedefs are all in here. And go ahead and save that and save that. And at the top of our index, we're going to require those. So const typedefs equals require. And we're just going to go /typedefs and resolvers equals require /resolvers. All right, let's just make sure that still works. Close that, run it again. Oh, let's see what happened here. So return typedef.definitions.sum can repeat property of sum. So I wonder where that sum came from. Let's see. All right, so the reason I'm getting that error is because if you remember over here, when we're exporting our resolvers, we said exports.resolvers, typedefs, exports.typedefs. So I can't just import it this way because the top level thing in there is exports. So within exports is typedef, so we can destructure that out of there. Same thing for resolvers. Save that, and that should now work. And yeah, looks like we're good. Let's just double check. Refresh this. Run our hello query again, and wonderful. We're all set. So in this episode, we just set up our GraphQL API. Starting next episode, we're going to actually hook up a MongoDB database to this. And then as we move forward, we're going to be completing more and more of this. If you enjoy this series, please make sure to remind me to charge my laptop because I have low battery, and tweet at me and let me know how you feel about this. You can follow me on Twitter at RahatCodes, and hopefully you enjoyed this and got something out of it. Thank you.